Hello, and welcome to the SharePoint Framework and JavaScript Special Interest Group Biweekly Sync. It is August 15th, 2019. I'm excited to be back from some vacation, and hopefully all of you have had a little bit of time off or have some time off scheduled for this summer. There we go. So into the agenda, engineering update on SharePoint Framework. We got the Patterns and Practices program updates for PnP JS, the CLI, the reusable controls, and the Yeoman generator. And then two great demos. The first from Bill Ayers. His a React functional component, a very cool demo, and then a demo from me actually talking about some of the one of the new features in PnP JS 2.0 extension methods. So we'll take a look at that a little bit later in the call. But jumping right into it, often we are asked, how do I get involved? How do I participate in patterns and practices, in these calls? How do I get involved? Well, we love demos. So if you are out there in the community and you're doing great work, which I know all of you are doing, reach out to us. We'd love for you to demo the work you're doing around SharePoint Framework or any of the patterns and practices components in your solutions for your customers or your companies. That could be web parts, application customizers, provisioning, really anything you create client-side related, SPFx related, or PnP JS, the CLI, the reusable controls, Yeoman generator, or all of those things mashed together in a really cool demo. Would love to see that. All you have to do to get involved, reach out to myself or Vesa, and we'll get you on the schedule for a demo in one of the upcoming calls. It can't always be the immediate next call because sometimes we're booked out, but we'll absolutely get you on a call, get you scheduled. We love to have the demos. I've said it before, and I'll keep saying it. I think they're really the best part of these calls is seeing the great work that all of you out there in the community are doing. As well, you can contribute on GitHub. That can take the form of reporting issues, submitting pull requests, or helping out with those issues and questions. So if you have a little bit of time and somebody's asked a question on one of the repositories that you might already know the answer to or have some ideas about, please do feel free to chime in and try and help out there. It's always very much appreciated by both the person whose question you're answering and the core team, because we don't always have the time to get to every question super quickly. So definitely appreciate the contributions. And of course, pull requests are welcome across all of our projects. And then finally, you can always provide feedback. So how are the calls going? How's the documentation? We know documentation can always be better, but where specifically can we improve that? Where else can we help? And then positive feedback is okay too. I do like to mention that because sometimes we get so focused on what we're doing wrong that we don't talk about some of the things we are doing right. So it's important to recognize those things as well. So moving right along, some resources here. This is a new slide that's been added to the rhythm since I last did these slides. So SharePoint Dev Docs, aka MS SPDev-Docs. And we've got the videos at aka MS SPDev-Videos. And then as well, that issues list there is actually the SharePoint Framework issues list, or general kind of SharePoint client-side, kind of the product issues list. So aka MS SPDev-Issues. So if you encounter issues with SharePoint Framework, working with modern sites, working with client-side pages and things like that, that aren't specific to one of the patterns and practices tools or products. So for PnP JS, issue with PnP JS, no matter what it is, throw that in the PnP JS repository. But these are more issues around SharePoint Framework itself and the product. Would go into akms/spdev-issues.
Yeah, so like it's not just about the SPFx. Anything around SharePoint Dev. The key point here is that from a standard support channel, you cannot actually receive developer-oriented support because that's not part of the support agreements which you can get. So we are providing engineering and community support through the AKMS SPDev issues. Anything related on development. Yeah.
So Risa, passing off to you for the SharePoint Framework updates.
So just a reminder, last time our SPFx training package was updated. It was in June. This is a awesome training package, free for you to get access. It contains multiple modules and also videos and hands-on labs and demos. So it's a really great set of training materials which will help you to learn and get started on SharePoint Framework development. And we keep on updating this on a quarterly basis. So the next update is coming up during this quarter, which is by end of September. So new stuff and new updates based on the latest versions. A few other updates since the last time, at least I've been in this course, because the 1st of August I still wasn't in this course, and because I was still on vacation. But on summertime, we released the first 18 videos of our Getting Started video series, and this is really around the fact that quite a lot of people joining on this course or in the community are also new people. They haven't necessarily done SharePoint framework development for the past 2 years. They're just turning into this and trying to look on what is a CSAM, what is a REST, how do I do SharePoint development, or how do I do SharePoint 2019 development? And these videos are trying to address that demand on on answering those getting started questions, so that everybody can easily board on the SharePoint developer train, so to say. So 18 first videos out, and there will be new videos and more videos available also later. They are available from the YouTube channel, and there's a separate playlist which is all around these videos. I think there's 6 to 7 MVPs, part of the core team who've been doing these videos. Well, actually, I'm not an MVP, and neither are you, and neither is Patrick, because we're MSFTs, but that's a separate discussion. Now, the latest updates on the SharePoint framework, so 1.9.1 version went out yesterday around, I would say, 10:30 a.m. Pacific time, and this is now basically replacing the 1.9. So we do apologize. We had a issue related on the local workbench in the SharePoint framework 1.9, and during my personal summer vacation, then there was a decision to pull the SharePoint framework 1.9 away, and then our engineering team was working on getting the 1.9.1 out, and that's now available. But this is now basically then introducing exactly the same capabilities as what we had in the 1.9, also fixing the workbench issue. If you run into any issues, please do let us know using the issue list, and we'll jump on those as fast as possible. But this is now available, and that's the latest version around SharePoint Framework. Now, related on the usage of SharePoint Framework, just quickly sharing that as well, updated stats on that. I think we have numbers from yesterday on this one. We can see it's kind of a typical July-August timeframe, a slowness on the growth on the curve, but we can also see that now that we are already in the mid-August, we can see a typical growth again continue. Right now, during July, I think the growth was something like 3% growth in the usage, which is quite a lot of less than the typical growth in a monthly by monthly basis. But still, if we compare year-over-year growth, we are now 293% up from the last year. So it's a massive growth, and adoption is increasing all the time. Obviously, a lot of one of the factors around adoption is the Microsoft Teams development with SharePoint Framework, and also the new stuff which we're building on will have definitely a positive impact on the adoption. We already demoed Office add-ins being built with SharePoint Framework in Spring in build and in SPC, so that's in the pipeline, and there's other cool stuff coming up as well. Obviously, as part of this transition, we are looking into renaming SharePoint Framework. There's no decisions yet on that one. We talked about this one quite a few times during this year. That decision has now actually been done, how it will be done, but the exact name has not been yet decided. So marketing will come up with a new name, which most likely will mean that we'll have new hashtags and everything else. But I think it will be a good decision. I can't really give you more insights on that one, but it will be a good decision because I know there's smart people, and I know where we're heading with this one. Anyway, quickly on the SharePoint dev roadmap, 1.9.1 went live yesterday, like I said, around 10:30 a.m. Pacific time. That is now the latest. It replaces 1.9. It has the general availability of library components, so you can use those in the production. Web tooling moved from Webpack 3 to Webpack 4. Graph API polishment, isolated web part model supported in Teams integration improvements. The next version, which we are currently actually already testing, is the 1.10. So we didn't jump on 2.0 because the major version update would not have made any sense. But 1.10 is the next version, and that's planned to get out, well, early September is maybe too early, but I think our thinking point is the second Tuesday of every single month. But we missed it this month as well. So that's always the objective, but there might be a few days here and there how we're moving between the release. Now, other topics popping under Office add-ins with SharePoint Framework is being progressed. I've seen the specs on that one, so that's been moving forward. Preview will start sooner later this year. Content security policy, additional security handling, CSAM.NET standard is being progressed. Current timeline is this quarter. So that would mean that it would come to preview by end of September. I can't promise that, but it looks insane, really, really promising. And there's a growing demand also internally that we need to get that one out. Story for SPFx solutions, we'll definitely have updates on that one latest on the Ignite timeframe, and additional content extensions for modern pages that would be Ignite timeframe as well. App catalog and deployment improvements earlier than that. There are some ALM API improvements queued up, and we'll talk about immediately on those when they are available or when we can talk about those. But I think that's it from my side. So let's jump into the PnP JS side. Patrick.
PnP JS client-side updates. 1.3.5 is scheduled for August 16th. That'll have some issue fixes and a few new features. Not a ton of stuff in that release. I've been on vacation. I know a lot of other folks have, but we'll get that out tomorrow, in fact. So somebody should get busy on that. And then version 2, work continues. Big push. We're going to aim, and this is just aiming for, this isn't a promise, an RC release candidate beta 1 in late September. I'm hoping we can get through a lot of the remaining issues by then, get something out for folks to start trying. How to get involved. We recorded a call. You can check on the link there, how to get involved in helping out with the V2 work and how to start contributing. Julie, Simon, and David are helping to coordinate that work. So if you go to the dev-v2 branch in the repository, you'll see in the README there a nice little guide David wrote up and the others, everybody's contributed to in terms of getting started and how to grab an issue and so forth. And then today we'll look at the extension methods, one of the new features coming to version 2. So excited to sort of show that off to folks. And then link at the bottom, PnP, github.io/PnPjs, hashtag PnPjs on Twitter. And you can always follow me at Mediocre Bowler on Twitter. And I pretty much just tweet stuff out about PnPjs. So you won't get a ton of spam following me. So CLI updates. So a new beta is available. We've got commands now for teamifying a group and then disabling and enabling flows, as well as some login enhancements around support for the personal information exchange file format. Using that as for authentication. And if you're not familiar with the CLI is a great command line tool for managing your SharePoint, Azure, and other Office 365 resources straight from your command line. It's cross-platform. So if you're in an environment that doesn't currently support PowerShell, the CLI is a great option for you to get involved or to use and really do your administrative tasks or some of your developer tasks. You can kind of script out creating sites or lists or things like that. Really useful tool just to throw in your developer tool belt. Install the latest beta from NPM at npm install-g at PnP Office 365-CLI at next. You can always get more information there at that link. And then hashtag Office 365-CLI on Twitter. There's a Gitter channel as well. And then that docs link again to get you details and more information. Reusable components, still in vacation mode, so no big updates on the reusable components. But for folks that might not be familiar with these are a set of React controls. There's a set of property controls and a set of content controls. The property controls are designed to be used in the property pane of your web parts when you're in edit mode, and the content controls are designed to be used in the sort of body content of your web part or application customizer to really give you a nice out-of-the-box look with a lot of great functionality already built in, so it saves you a lot of time. Update on the CLI just before the call. Okay, I didn't hear that. Didn't get that into the slide. So updates now into the SPFx solutions for 1.9.1. So that's a great update. And excited to see that get in there. So the controls, great addition again to your tool belt. Drop those into your project, save yourself a ton of time, gain a ton of functionality, really help build out your projects quickly. And finally, the Community Yeoman generator Again, still in vacation mode, so no big updates here, but this is a Yeoman generator driven by the community, and it is built on top of the out-of-the-box SharePoint Framework Yeoman generator. So at the end of the day, you're going to get a in quotes, real or SharePoint Framework project with the same dependencies and same underlying Microsoft, code, but it's going to have a lot of additional options to use frameworks that might not be available or that aren't available in the out-of-the-box Yeoman generator. It's got additional setup options as you go through to add things to your project directly from the Yeoman generator, such as PnP JS or the reusable controls can get added right into your project at setup time, so you don't have to add those in yourself, and a bunch of other great features. So definitely check that out. And across all of these, pull requests and contributions are absolutely welcome and encouraged. So if you're looking to get involved and you maybe you're interested in working on React controls, maybe you want to work on CLI, PnPjs, any of these areas, the generator, please do get involved, check them out. And if you're not sure how to get started, you can always drop an issue and comment there on, how do I get started? I'm interested in working on this. What do I do? And folks will be more than happy to help you out. So definitely check that out. And now we are into demo time in record time. So Bill, if you are ready, I think you can take over presenting.
So React functional components and hooks is the topic. So there are two related things. React functional components have been around for a while. React hooks is fairly new, so new in fact that you would need the 0.91 SharePoint framework to automatically get the version of React that we need for React hooks, which is 16.8. So that's timely 1.91 release. Before, with the earlier releases, you have to fiddle around to get it to use a different version of the React framework, which isn't much fun. So that's me, boring slide, but there's my blog site. If you want to see, I've got an article where I describe this in more detail, and that's my Twitter handle. So why functional components? So normally when we build a React component, we use a class, and it's a derived class from React component. But there's another way of building a React component, which is just to make a simple function. And look how simple that is. It's simply a function that's got the name of the component and then a single argument, which is your props, and then you just return, and this would be in a TSX file, obviously, return the React elements that you want to render. Very clean, very simple, as Gordon Ramsay would probably say. You don't have any this and that and all those complexities. You can get a bit of kudos if you've got one of these hipster functional programmers who's done a science course and says, hey, man, you should be using functional programming or something. Well, yeah, kind of. JavaScript is kind of functional. Actually, it's not even a classical language, so it's not a natural fit to use classes in JavaScript or TypeScript. So this does fit better with the way the underlying language was constructed as a prototypal inheritance model. Very easy to test. It's a pure function, so the only thing that it depends on is the properties that come in, which is one of the arguments. So that's great. Now, of course, if you want to do something like state, and a lot of components are actually pure functions, but often you want some kind of state, and for that we have to introduce hooks, which is the problem that React hooks solve. So it might look like a fairly esoteric thing, but it does mean that your code is a lot cleaner and at least what's going on if you use this functional component approach rather than classes. So let's look at what happens if we were to run the Yeoman generator. So now you should see my PowerShell window. So we know the drill. If I go up a level, I do yo at Microsoft/SharePoint, and you've probably seen this 1,000 times. And I build just using the out-of-the-box Yeoman generator, and we go through, we answer all the questions, and eventually it says, do you want to use the no JavaScript framework, Knockout or React? You're going to pick React. Why wouldn't you? And I'm not going to go through all this, but eventually that would generate this project in Hello World. And if I open the editor in there, this is what you'll see in, because it's a React web part, you get a components library or subdirectory, and then in there's a TSX file. I assume everybody's familiar with React, and you get this strange syntax where it returns all the divs, and this magical TSX compiler comes and composes it all and turns it into valid TypeScript and ultimately JavaScript. But it's a class based on React component. So if I wanted to make that a functional component, what I could do is, and nobody's suggesting you should go in and refactor everything to do this, but you could say export default function hello world, and then I just pass through the props. I could make those strongly typed if I wanted to, and then I don't need to do a render method because it's not a class. It's just going to return. I've got an extra closing brace which I can get rid of, and that, simplify that into a React functional component. So all this is doing is returning all this. I have to change this as now there's no this anymore. So that, again, that's a simplification. So I just return the props. And if you want to be really clever, you could use an array destructuring, an object destructuring operator here, and what that does is you could just pass that as a description. I'm going to come back to this destructuring a bit later. That's just a feature of the language. It's nothing to do with the making it a functional component. Right. So I've got an example. So if you go the let's go to the top. So I go to the SharePoint under GitHub. So GitHub/SharePoint, and then there's a library called or a project called SPFx web parts, and you can download that. Be aware that that's about 1 GB now. So you might want a sparse checkout if you just wanted a few samples. But if I go down into samples, I've actually got a few here which are all starting with React-fun, and React functional component. This is the simplest one, which is just going to be like the hello world web part. So I've built one here. So if you want to download that and try it, you can do. I'll just show you what it looks like. So it's this functional component, hello world. I've actually strongly typed the properties. This is not a huge difference, but it is significantly simpler, and as we get into more complicated examples, the story gets better. But look how quickly I can write using a functional component, a new component in here. So if I want to say my component name, give it a property equals Bill, and I can just define it up here, or I could do it in a separate file if I wanted to. So I'm going to, all I have to do is function my component, and then the props, and then h1 and hello props dot, what was it, name, wasn't it? And I've just written another React component, and I can even argue it just from memory, so it just simplifies things a surprising amount. And if you want to see what that one looks like, well, it just renders exactly the same. Just before I save that, it will render the same. Go to React Fun. Just use that one, and I'll do a gulp serve here. Hope I haven't got one running somewhere else. Just check I haven't accidentally left something running in the other window now. So that will fire up, and in the workbench, and if I load that web part up, it just looks like the normal out of the box web part. And just to prove that that change I just made, if I save that, it should reload, shouldn't it? Looks as though it's reloading. And when that refreshes, looks as though it's working. And now it says hello Bill, because I've got that extra component that I added in there. Right, now that's great, but typically what we want is something that's got some state in it. And, although, as I say, a lot of components, the smaller components might be pure like that, we often need to work with state. So I've got another example here called Roman numerals. And if I just go to that one, and I'll kill this, go up a level and go into, so this example, they're all in the samples library. And this one is called React Functional Component Stateful. And I'll do a gulp serve of this one as well. So all you need to do is go to that samples library, download it, and then you'll need to do an npm install, and then it will all be there and ready to run. There are instructions on how to run these samples on GitHub as well. So this is the Roman numerals web part. So this has got a little bit of state in it. So what happens here is I've got an input box here, and when I change the values in this text box, the Roman numerals below come back. And if I go to edit the web part, I've actually got a couple of extra controls that I added just to make it a little bit more exciting. And I can, I've got some captions and things that I can put in there. And so now that I've done that, I can use that increment and decrement counter. So this component has state. It needs to know what the user's entered and what state it's in. It's not purely dependent on the properties which we pass it through these controls in the web part settings. So let's look at the code behind that. So this is my Roman numerals web part, Roman numerals.tsx, and what we have here is so it's still a functional component, but in order to support state on line 11, I've used this feature called React hooks. Now, React hooks has a number of methods. They all start with the word use. So there are about 10 that come out of the box, as it were, for hooks, and then you can write your own as well. So you can bundle functionality into these as well. So, I obviously haven't got time to go into it in much detail, but if you want to learn more, if you just Google for React hooks, you'll find a full explanation of how it works and how you use it. And this is a sort of the direction that React is going at the moment. But it's a new enough feature that you need the latest version of the SharePoint framework to be compatible with it. So this is what this function useState does is it takes an argument which is an initial value, and I've actually taken one of the properties to provide that initial value, and then it returns a tuple. And so remember that spread operator, well, I use an object destructuring operator. This is an array destructuring operator that I'm using here that spreads those two elements into these two constants. So there's all that's really happening. I could have written this just as well as foo, then just say, value equals var value equals foo 0 is equivalent to what we've done there. So, and the same with the second one. So it returns the value and then a setter, which is a function, of course. So that setter is equivalent to in state, you'd have a set state function. If we were using a class-based React component, we'd use set state. We'd have to set things up in the constructor, and we might well find we had to do things in some of these component did mount and component did unmount methods as well. There might be some complexity around that too. So this is really very simple. So just a one line, this handles state for me. I can have other states as well. If I had another variable called foo, I could call that foo and set foo. The names are immaterial. I can call them what I like, but the convention is to call it the variable name and then a setter, prefix that with set. So that's how that works. So now when I go into the input control, you can see the value is being picked up from value. There's no this and there's no this variable that I have to worry about whether I've got the right one or not, and things like that. And I've also got an onChange method there, or function that I've defined up here, which uses that set value to set the new value. So as I go into the input control, it sets the states to a new value, and that causes a re-render. And then I've also got, if I choose to show these up-down buttons, then I've got an on-click event, and I've used, that could be a function as well, but I happen to have used a lambda expression that then uses a set value to increment the value. So very simple, you know, a very simple function actually that does a reasonable amount. So that's my second example where we have state, and I've got a third one, which is also quite interesting. So I go up a level and go into React functional with data fetch. And in this example, so if I do a gulp serve on this one, and we can have a look at that. I've actually loaded it up already in another window, which will save me running it as long as I don't refresh the page or anything. This is the Teams tracker. So what that is doing is, so this one I can't run in the workbench because I have no context to work with. So what it's doing is it's running inside a tenant in the tenant workbench, and it gives me a list of all the teams I'm a member of. And then I've also got a toggle here which shows the channels for each team. So when I click on that, it's actually making another request using Patrick's PnP JS library, of course, to populate these so that the team members, sorry, the team channels are shown as well. So let's look at the code behind that one. So this is the Teams tracker, and I look at the Teams tracker control itself first. So again, I've used use state, so a React hook to manage a Teams list state variable, and we've got a set Teams list. And the second thing, the second type of hook we've used here is one called useEffect, which is intended for things that involve side effects, and that's why it's called useEffect. And what we do there is we pass the React useEffect a function. In this case, I've used a lambda. I could also spell it out as a function if I wanted to, which has no parameters, but it calls the graph. So back up here, somewhere I've set this up on init in the sort of the higher level, the actual web part. The web part, of course, has to be class-based because it's extending a base client-side web part, and then it's got an on init method where I set up the PnP JS graph library, and then down in the Teams tracker component itself, I'm using that, and in this callback, it goes and gets the teams and then uses that setter on the state to update the list of teams. So when the control is first rendered, it's going to trigger this. It will pass through this useEffect, and then when that callback returns, it will then update the control. So you'll see a spinner, which I think I've set somewhere. I can't remember where it is. I think there's a spinner. Here it is. Yes, that it shows until that teams list gets updated, and then once the teams list is populated with an array of teams, it then maps that and outputs a series of list elements with each team, and that itself is another control which we'll look at in a second. So the one thing to watch out for here is, you see I've put this second argument to useEffect, which is quite important, because just think about what happens here. Every time this Teams tracker gets rendered, it calls this. And what would happen is it would call this every time. It would then go and fetch the data and set the teams list variable. And because that's like set state in React, then it will trigger a re-render of the component, and you get a nasty infinite loop if you don't do something to say only do it the first time. So what this empty array says is I'm conditional on nothing, and the consequence is it only calls this the first time that the component is rendered, and it populates this list. And then the list of teams is each team is rendered using this separate team component. So if we go into the team component itself, it's very simple actually. It too has state, which is the list of channels, which might be empty depending on whether this show channels property is true or not. So that ultimately comes from the property pane when we set up the properties of the web part. And then it'll either set the channels list to an empty list if we're not showing the channels, or it'll go off and get the teams. Now, just a little side note, it might not be efficient to do that, but it's for the purpose of the demonstration. I think it's useful to do it that way. You might decide that the cost of making that call is too high and I want to cache it somewhere. And there are lots of ways of doing that as well. But just for the sake of this demonstration, we're actually, when that gets shown, it's going to go up off, and each of these teams is going to populate itself, which keeps it nice and contained. And then again, once I've got a channel list, I'll use a map function to then output an array of list elements with the individual channels in. And in this case, I'm dependent on whether I'm showing channels or not. So this is something that the user can change through the web part property panel, property pane. So I need to be aware. You see, that's coming in as one of the props. But if that changes, I need to make sure that this use effect knows that and gets called again. So this is really just an array of dependencies of what use effect is doing. So all of that, it would have taken a lot of fiddling around with lots of methods and did mount and did unmount, and you'd have to think about, well, I know, what do I do if the user changes this show channels, and I have to go and deal with all this. It all ends up being a lot simpler using this approach. So, you know, it might not be obvious on this first initial glance, but I would encourage you to go and find out a bit more about it. First of all, get up to speed with SPFx 1.91. You can download these samples, and they will work with even if you've got an earlier version of the SharePoint framework generator installed, or you can because it will just do an npm install, so that's not a problem. But if you're doing it from scratch and you want to start using this approach, I wouldn't go and refactor everything to use functional components and React hooks. That's totally unnecessary, but you might choose to. I have actually refactored a lot of my code using that because the resulting code is so much cleaner and so much nicer that I've kind of got hooked on this approach. Anyway, learn about React hooks. Don't forget there's Google for React hooks, and try those samples that I've got on GitHub, and let's write some cleaner code, everybody. I hope you like it, and there's some links as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Bill. Great demo. And I'll say I haven't had a chance yet to try out hooks, so it was great to see them in action. And look forward to try them out myself when I get an opportunity. But very cool demo. Hopefully that will encourage lots of folks to try out hooks, to check that out. Then I will transition over to a quick demo about so a new feature in SharePoint and PnP JS 2.0 is extension methods. So I've set up, I'm not going to run the Yeoman generator. I've run the Yeoman generator and created a project. This is actually, I think, probably 1.8 something version. But for the purposes of the demo, not that important which SharePoint framework we're actually in. But you can see, so we have imported SP from the @PnP library, so no change there. That's exactly as you would expect it to happen. But then we've done something a little bit different, and we've imported @PnP SP source webs because we want to use the web object off of SP. And this is something we weren't going to talk about a ton today, but I want to mention is this new idea we're introducing in 2.0 of selective imports. So you'll have the opportunity to import just the pieces of PnP JS that you want to use in your projects. And the real value there is much smaller bundle sizes and the ability for Webpack and others to do tree shaking where it couldn't before, because before, if you included web referenced everything, so you got everything by default, and the tree shaking really wasn't effective and couldn't work because you just ended up with all the references. So by breaking this out, you can actually import just the pieces you need, so you can have much smaller projects, much smaller bundle sizes. However, if folks, the first thing you might think is, do I have to refactor all my code? The answer is no. We've included what we've called presets that bring everything into the library. So we have an all preset, which right now is everything, which will mimic the way PnP JS 1 is behaving. So everything gets included by default. And then we've got one other right now, core, which is just web lists and items. So not a lot of other stuff. And in the future, we might have some other presets we'll see. But for sure, open to feedback there. And that's something I think we'll spend some time hashing out, especially during the beta process as we go through these things. But just understand, so you can import now just the webs piece. So we've imported the webs piece. I've imported this web extensions. So this is another file. We'll look at that in just a second. Coming down here, I still have to do the sp.setup. That's something we'll never be able to get around because inside SharePoint Framework, the only true context you have, the only way you really know where you are in the world is from the context variable inside each web part. So we've got to include that. We've got to get that so we can get our URLs and get some other information off of that so we know where we are. So we do that step still, sp.setup, pass it the context. And then we come in here to our render method, and I've got some, Bill had some very nice, nicely rendered web parts. Mine, I'm just shoving HTML right into the inner HTML property, and I'm in fact using the pre-tag, so I'm not even bothering to format it. So apologies for that, but this demo is all about checking out how these extension methods and things work. So one of the other changes is we've got this idea of invocables. So before you would do web.get, and get would execute your method and bring you back the results of that web. The get method is still there. So again, you don't have to immediately refactor all your code, but for new code, you can leave off the get and simply invoke sp.web, and that will give you back the exact same results of what you used to get with get. So just kind of a nice little thing. And what that really enables is for certain things, the default action isn't a get. So there's certain places inside the SharePoint API that the default action is really like a post. And we didn't have a great model for that in the version 1. So this gives us a little bit more flexibility because we could actually, the default action here could do a post or some other operation or have a little bit more complex functionality than just say get. But get is still there again, so you don't have to immediately refactor all your code. And we're just getting the web data. If we bounce over here to the online workbench, so I am running gulp serve in the background. We look at the online workbench. My beautifully formatted output is just the result of getting that web. So we see that work. And that is very exciting, I'm sure, for everybody. But what we really want to talk about is the extension methods. So SPWeb does not, out of the box, have a method for get top 5 lists. And in fact, if we comment out our import here, we should get, should get a little red squiggly eventually. It might not because it's already resolved that. So, so we'll import those web extensions, and let's take a look at those. So in here, in this file, we are importing some things because we need to extend them. We're importing some of the lists functionality because we need that. And you can import the list functionality specific to the web object. So again, you can get very specific. So I could import everything from the lists submodule. So we've been calling these things submodules, and we might come up with a better term. later, but that seems to make sense to me. Or I could be more specific and say, I just want the parts of the lists submodule that deals with webs. And then there's this helper function called extend factory. And so there's 3 ways to apply extension methods. And there's an article about this, which I'll show in a second, that describes all this. But we're going to extend the actual factory. So in PnP JS 2.0, you're no longer going to instantiate concrete instances of classes. So where you do new web in the past, you're simply going to use the web factory function and get back an iWeb instance. So you won't actually deal with concrete implementations. And what that does is give us who do the development work, so us being all of you on the call who help with the development of PnP JS, gives us a lot more flexibility of what we can do behind the scenes without breaking people, as long as we maintain that factory function, the web factory function, returns the iWeb interface. And as long as we don't break anything in those contracts, we can actually do a lot of manipulation and changes on the back end and how we do things. And we have some ideas around that, which we'll share after we get the actual release done. But so you can see here, I'm doing a little bit of TypeScript-y stuff here. So I'm declaring a module. And I'm extending that interface. And this isn't strictly required for the extension methods to work, but it's required to get the proper typing support that you might expect from TypeScript. So we're extending that module. So this is some boilerplate kind of TypeScript code, and we're extending that interface iWeb, and we're adding in this method here to get the top 5 lists, and that returns a promise. And then we're using extend factory. So we're passing in the web factory. So in 1.0, you would remember that you would do something like new web, right? And you could give it, well, that's not at all what I wanted. So you could do new web and you'd give it a URL here. That syntax is changed now to just be web. And so we don't use the new keyword anymore. And so what we're doing here is extending that web factory itself. And we're adding to it this method. So you can see here, I've just got a plain object with a method in here to provide that implementation. And I could add additional methods here, if I so choose to do that. And that's all I have to do to extend that. And then all of the methods I add here will be applied to every iWeb instance that's created out of that factory. Which is really powerful in a couple of ways. It lets you add custom functionality that will be available across your entire application with typing support if you do the declare module. It also, say it happens, there's a bug in a method and we have, there's a fix for it, but we're a couple weeks away from the release and it's a blocker for your project. So you could override an existing method using this capability here on web, for example. And if we go back to our class, you can see we're using the get top 5 lists method here, and we're just going to write that out. And so if I refresh our page, double check everything's built. So you can see now we've got our top 5 lists are going to load here. You can see these are now SP list instances. And there's, if you just trust me, there's 5 of them there, and we've got that. So we've added a nice extension method, and because we added the type support, we get the support here to say get me the top 5 lists, and that all does the build builds out via TypeScript as you would expect with the type checking. This also works, of course. So I'm going to uncomment. So we're going to actually import the web factory from PnP source webs. And the new documentation will have lots of details around how to do these different imports and how to do the selective imports and what that means. So don't worry about that too much now. But you can see here, I wanted to demonstrate that we're actually using that factory. So it matches the syntax that the new method did. So to update to use the factories, you just remove the new keyword, call web, and we can actually call our method there. And really what we're showing here is that through both ways, everything continues to work. So we get through that factory and we get our top 5 lists again. And the last thing I wanted to show with extension methods is the other really powerful thing about that, and I need to import my item extensions. So if we look at item extensions, so items, we have the get the last 5 updated items extension method. And so you can see the implementation there. We're extending now the items factory, and with our plain object, we've added our method here, and it's a function. I'm not using the lambda syntax, the arrow syntax here, because I want to be able to type the this parameter or the this object, or however you want to phrase that. You can't do that with lambdas. Lambdas have no concept of this. So I'm using function here, but that means my this is actually going to be typed as an items, which means I would have all the items properties available to me with proper type checking. But as well, I can just do the top 5, and then you can see I'm not, this is the equivalent then of get. Again, you can see I'm simply invoking my expression directly as an invocable. So that's our extend items factory. And so, oops, wrong thing. So if we come back here, we can say items dot get last 5 updated items. We get that nicely with IntelliSense, and we're going to get that into the little D variable, and then we're going to write that out to the screen. And so we're going to fire that up. And we're going to hopefully see, oh, nothing. So we don't have some last updated items. I'm not going to bother debugging that right at this moment. But the important thing to see here is those extension methods exist way deep in your tree. So I was able to go spweb list get by title items, and there's my extension method. So that extending the factory makes it apply to every instance of that items interface that gets created. So this is a really powerful way now to extend PnP JS with your custom methods for your application. So this might be, get latest news articles. It might be, whatever it is, your specific requirements. But I want to get those, and those will appear again across your entire project. And we'll talk at another call, because we're getting close to time here, on how to create your own custom bundles with your own extensions bundled in them. So essentially you have your own custom PnP JS for your application. So we'll talk about that. And all of this is aimed at giving all of you who are using the library a much more customizable experience, much more control over, one, what you're bringing into your projects through selective imports, and then the ability to add on and extend the functionality. I think is going to be very valuable for folks across their applications and across, especially working across their teams in their company. It gets much easier to extend these things with a custom bundle. And then as SharePoint Framework reusable libraries comes to fruition, as it's doing right now, that'll be another very powerful piece to use with PnP JS, is create your custom reusable library, use that across all of your applications. And so it's got just the functionality you need for your company, your clients, from PnP JS brought into SharePoint Framework as a custom bundle. So that'll be a really powerful features, and we'll be talking more about this over the coming weeks and months and so forth. So hopefully that was a nice preview of extension methods and some of the new power coming to PnP JS. And to answer your question, my method names don't go back to your telemetry. So no, we are adding. Some of you may have noticed we are adding method name telemetry to the library, but that's 100% opt-in. So there's nothing automatic about that. It's something that you have to explicitly invoke, either through a decorator or through, there's a code-based way to do it. Well, it's all code, but there's a non-decorator-based way to do that. So you would, if you wanted to share your method names with us, you certainly could do that, but it's not something you ever would have to do or would be expected to do. Again, this is all in response to feedback we've heard from folks in the community and concerns we share with the just how the PnP JS library was growing over time. Like, it's great to grow, but it stinks if you just want to use web to have, you know, content types, lists, items, features, fields, everything else in that. So I think it's a great addition to selective imports, and I think the extension methods work with that very well to be a very powerful thing. So excited that you all are excited to get that out there to the community. And then, yeah, Vase is commenting as well on the telemetry. So, you know, again, we are taking great pains to not gather any PII, any identifying information. We simply know the tenant, and we know that a request was made. And if it's one of the core methods, we'll know what method you called. So maybe you add a field, we'll know that you called add a field. We won't know any of the associated data, such as field name. We won't know the site it was done in or any of that kind of stuff. We just know that someone called add a field in the tenant. So we do know the tenant, which is, again, important for our reporting needs. Next, SPFx JavaScript meeting is going to be August 29th, in 2 weeks from today. The next general dev special interest group meeting will be next Thursday, August 22nd, as well. So that'll be at the same time, so 10 Eastern US, whatever time that is where you live. And then learn, reuse, share, aka MS, SP, PnP. Thank you all for joining the call. Not much time for Q&A today. 2 great demos. Thank you, Bill, for being on the call and doing the demo. Thank you to all of you for joining the call and being with us here today, and look forward to talking to you all soon. Have a great rest of your week, and take care. Bye.